Your fingers are numb. It's been 3 days since the last kill, and the deer you're tracking just vanished into the treeline like it knew you were coming. You're 40,000 years in the past, and you are starving. Not hungry, starving. The kind of hunger that makes your hands shake when you grip your spear. And here's the problem nobody talks about. Your spear is useless right now. The deer is 200 feet away. Your spear only works at 20. You could die tonight not because there's no food nearby, but because you don't have a way to reach it. This is the moment. Not a campfire brainstorm. Not some genius flash of insight in a cave. This is a human being staring at an animal they cannot kill, with a weapon that cannot reach it, while their stomach is eating itself. This is where the bow and arrow was born, out of desperation, not curiosity. And here's what makes this so unsettling. For over 2 million years, human ancestors hunted with nothing but thrown rocks and stabbing spears. 2 million years. That's not a typo. That's almost the entire span of human evolution, spent within arm's reach of danger. Then, somewhere between 70,000 and 60,000 years ago, something changed. Someone, we don't know who, we don't know their name, we will never know their face, figured out how to kill from a distance without ever touching the animal. And that single idea didn't just change hunting. It rewired the entire trajectory of the human species. But here's what scientists actually found, and it's stranger than you'd expect. The earliest solid evidence for bows doesn't come from bones or wood. It comes from stone. Tiny stone points, found in Sibudu Cave in South Africa, dated to roughly 64,000 years ago. So small and so precisely shaped that they couldn't have been thrown by hand or mounted on a heavy spear. They were too light, too delicate. Researchers ran the math, examined the fracture patterns, studied the impact damage under microscopes, and the only weapon system that explained those marks was a bow. Think about that for a second. We don't have the bow itself. Wood rots. String disintegrates. Sinew disappears within decades, let alone tens of thousands of years. So how do we know it existed? Because the evidence of violence survived even when the weapon didn't. The wounds outlived the weapon that made them. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. Before the bow, hunting was a full-body risk. You had to get close enough to a wounded animal to finish the job, close enough for a gored leg, a broken rib, a hoof to the skull. Archaeologists have found ancient human skeletons riddled with healed fractures, the kind you'd expect from a rodeo rider, not a peaceful forager. Hunting with a spear wasn't hunting. It was hand-to-hand combat with something that didn't want to die. So ask yourself, what does it feel like to invent a weapon that lets you kill without being killed? What does that do to a person's nervous system when, for the first time in human history, you can end a threat before it ever reaches you? This is where the first psychological shift happened, and it's the first of several moments in this story where ancient behavior and modern behavior start to look eerily identical. Because the moment humans gained the ability to strike from a distance, something in our species' relationship with risk changed permanently. We stopped needing courage in the old sense. We started needing precision. Sound familiar? It should. It's the same shift that happened again with firearms. Again with drones. Again, arguably, with the internet, the ability to affect someone without ever standing close enough to feel the consequences. The bow was humanity's first taste of distance as power. And once we tasted it, we never went back. But let's rewind, because the invention itself raises a question nobody likes to sit with. How do you even think of a bow if you've never seen one before? You can't copy something that doesn't exist. There was no blueprint, no prior example anywhere on Earth. Someone had to notice something completely unrelated to hunting and connect it to a problem they were dying to solve. Here's the leading theory, and it's almost too simple to believe. Early humans were already using cordage, twisted plant fiber and animal sinew, for binding tools, for traps, for lashing stone axe heads onto wooden handles. At some point, someone bent a flexible branch to lash something to it, and the branch sprang back. Hard, fast, with force that came from nowhere but the wood itself. And that's the moment. Not a eureka in a cave lit by firelight. A snapped-back branch that whipped across someone's hand hard enough to leave a mark. Pain, not inspiration, might be the true origin of the bow. But here's what scientists actually found when they dug deeper into this theory. Bentwood traps, the kind that used stored energy in a branch to snap shut or launch, may have existed before bows. Some researchers believe hunting traps, snares that used a bent sapling to yank a noose tight around an animal's leg, came first. If that's true, then the bow wasn't invented by a hunter chasing prey. It was invented by someone setting a trap and stealing the idea from their own snare. Let that sit for a second. The most iconic hunting weapon in human history might have been reverse-engineered from a trap designed to catch animals without a human even being present. This is where the story stops being simple. Because building a trap that snaps is one thing. Building a weapon you hold, aim, and fire with your own hands, your own eyes, your own judgment is something else entirely. It requires you to trust an invisible force. Stored energy. Tension you can't see. Coiled inside a piece of wood, waiting to be released in a direction you choose. And that's genuinely strange when you think about it. Every weapon before the bow worked through direct force, your muscle, your throw, your stab. The bow was the first weapon in human history that worked through stored force. Energy loaded in advance, then unleashed later on command. It's the same principle behind a mousetrap, a crossbow, a rubber band, a car engine's compressed fuel. The bow was humanity's first machine. Not a tool, a machine. A device that converts one kind of energy into another on a delay under human control. That idea, store energy now, release it later, aimed exactly where you want it, didn't just build a weapon. It built the mental framework for engineering itself. Here's your first reframe, the moment. That should make you rethink everything you assumed walking into this video. You probably pictured the bow as a hunting tool first, a weapon of war second. But early evidence tells a messier story. Some of the earliest arrow damage found on human bones, not animal bones, human bones, comes from roughly the same era as the earliest hunting evidence. Which means almost as soon as this weapon existed, it wasn't only used on deer. Sit with that. The tool that let a starving human finally reach a fleeing animal from 200 feet away is the exact same tool that let a human end another human's life without ever standing close enough to look them in the eyes. This is the part modern society doesn't like discussing when they talk about ancient innovation. We love the survival narrative, clever ancestors solving hunger, outsmarting nature, feeding their children. But every major leap in human weapon technology has a second, darker application baked in from day one. The bow didn't just feed families. It made violence easier. It removed the last physical barrier between one human and another, proximity. Think about what proximity actually does to violence. It's harder to hurt someone when you can feel their breath, see the fear in their face, hear them beg. Distance strips that away. The bow was the first tool in human history that let you kill someone while looking calm, while feeling nothing close to what your body should feel when ending a life. Does that sound familiar? It should, because it's the exact same psychological mechanism behind every long-range weapon invented since muskets, artillery, missiles, drone strikes. The further you are from the consequence, the easier the trigger becomes to pull. Ancient humans discovered this fact about their own psychology 64,000 years before modern warfare ever formalized it into doctrine. But let's step back into the survival side of the story, because the hunting implications alone were staggering. Once bows existed, hunting strategy flipped completely. Spear hunting required groups, multiple hunters, coordinated ambushes, driving animals toward cliffs or traps, enormous physical risk shared across a team. Bow hunting could be done by one person, silently, from cover, without the animal ever knowing a threat existed until the moment it was too late. This changed who could hunt. Suddenly, hunting wasn't limited to the strongest, fastest, most physically dominant members of a group. Skill and patience mattered more than raw muscle. Some researchers argue this shift may have opened hunting roles to a wider range of people within early human communities. A possibility that challenges a lot of assumptions about rigid ancient gender roles that modern audiences have been taught for decades. Here's your second connection to modern psychology, and it's an uncomfortable one. The bow was arguably the first technology in human history that rewarded patience and precision over brute force, the same shift we see today every time a physically weaker competitor outperforms a stronger one through skill, strategy, or technology. Chess beats muscle. Marksmanship beats size. The bow proved that idea 60,000 years before anyone wrote it down. Now here's where the story takes a turn that most videos on this topic completely skip. Making a bow sound simple in theory, bend wood, add string, done. In reality, it's one of the most technically demanding objects a prehistoric human could produce, and getting it wrong meant the weapon would fail exactly when you needed it most. The wood had to flex without snapping. Too stiff, and it wouldn't store enough energy. Too flexible, and it wouldn't launch anything with force. Early bowmakers had to understand, intuitively without any written science, the internal structure of different wood species. Which trees bent and sprang back cleanly. Which ones splintered under stress. This required years, sometimes generations, of trial and error passed down within communities. And the string was worse. Plant fiber snapped under tension. Rawhide stretched when wet and went slack. The real breakthrough came from sinew, the tough connective tissue from animal tendons, twisted and dried into cord strong enough to hold under repeated, violent stress. Do you understand what that means? Someone had to butcher an animal, strip out its tendons, understand that this specific tissue behaved differently from muscle or skin, and figure out how to process it into cordage strong enough to store lethal energy. That's not luck. That's not a lightning bolt idea. That's accumulated knowledge, tested, failed, refined, and passed down across dozens, maybe hundreds, of human generations before anyone got it right. Here's the midpoint reset, because what you're about to hear was hidden from most history books entirely. For over a century, mainstream archaeology assumed complex weapon technology like the bow belonged almost exclusively to modern humans, Homo sapiens, arriving in Europe roughly 40,000 years ago, technologically outclassing everyone else, including Neanderthals. But that story is falling apart. Newer excavations, particularly in Europe, have uncovered evidence suggesting Neanderthals may have used projectile weapons of their own, potentially including early bow-like or spear-thrower technology, far earlier than anyone expected. If that's true, the tidy narrative of clever sapiens outsmart primitive Neanderthals with superior weapons isn't just oversimplified. It might be flat-out wrong. Why does this matter? Because for decades, the extinction of Neanderthals was explained largely through the lens of technological superiority. Sapiens had better weapons, better hunting range, better tools, and Neanderthals simply couldn't compete. If Neanderthals also had access to advanced projectile weapons, then the real reason they disappeared becomes far murkier, far more uncomfortable, and far less flattering to the humans always win because we're the smartest species narrative we've been fed since childhood. Here's a question worth sitting with. What if the bow wasn't the reason modern humans survived and Neanderthals didn't? What if it was something else entirely? Disease, climate shifts, interbreeding, sheer population numbers, and the bow is just the technology we can see, so we built an entire extinction narrative around the one piece of evidence that happened to survive. That's the danger of studying prehistory through fragments. We don't see what happened. We see what didn't rot. Let's return to the weapon itself, because there's a detail about early bow use that most people never consider. The arrows mattered more than the bow. A bow without a well-made arrow is nearly useless. The earliest stone arrowheads discovered had to be small, light, and razor-sharp, precisely balanced so the arrow would fly straight instead of tumbling out of the air after a few feet. Researchers studying the microscopic wear patterns on ancient stone points found something chilling. Some of these tiny points show damage consistent with impact at extremely high velocity, embedded deep in bone, exactly the kind of damage you'd expect from an arrow, not a hand-thrown spear or dart. The evidence isn't circumstantial anymore. It's forensic. And here's a detail that should genuinely unsettle you. Some of the oldest arrow-related injuries found on ancient human remains show wounds to the back. Not the chest, not the front, the back. Meaning the person was likely running away when they were killed. Sit with that for a second. The bow didn't just make hunting animals easier. It made hunting people easier, too, from a distance while they fled without ever needing to face them. This is your third connection to modern psychology, and it might be the most disturbing one. Studies on modern violence consistently show that people find it significantly easier to harm someone who isn't looking at them, someone whose face they can't see, someone who exists only as a distant target. The bow was the first tool in human history built specifically around that psychological loophole, and once ancient humans discovered they could exploit it, there was no going back to a world without it. Now here's the part of the story that flips everything on its head one more time, the reveal most people watching this never expected. You'd assume, given everything so far, that the invention of the bow made prehistoric life more violent overall. More conflict, easier killing, more war. But here's what scientists actually found when they studied long-term patterns in prehistoric violence across different regions. In some areas, the introduction of long-range weapons like the bow actually appears to correlate with a decrease in close-range violent conflict over time. Why? Because the threat of being killed from a distance without warning changed the entire social calculus of aggression. When anyone in a rival group could kill you before you ever saw them, direct confrontation became far riskier for everyone, not just the weaker party. In other words, the bow may have made ancient humans more cautious, not more reckless. Mutual vulnerability created a strange kind of deterrence, tens of thousands of years before anyone coined the term mutually assured destruction. Does that sound familiar? It should. It's the exact same logic underpinning nuclear deterrence theory in the 20th century. Ancient humans stumbled into a version of this psychological standoff with wood, sinew, and stone, long before anyone had a word for game theory. But don't mistake deterrence for peace. The archaeological record from this period also shows something far darker, something that historians have only recently started connecting directly to bow technology. Evidence of what looks disturbingly like organized, planned violence between groups, rather than spontaneous, chaotic conflict. Skeletal remains found in mass burial sites from tens of thousands of years ago show clustered arrow wounds, individuals killed by multiple projectiles fired from a distance, patterns consistent with ambush rather than face-to-face combat. This is the darkest reveal of this story, and it's been sitting quietly in the archaeological record for years without getting the attention it deserves. Before the bow, large-scale coordinated violence between human groups was limited by physical proximity. You had to get close enough to fight, which meant both sides faced real physical risk, which naturally limited how far conflicts could escalate. The bow removed that limit. For the first time in human history, one group could inflict mass casualties on another group from a distance with minimal risk to themselves. Some researchers now argue that the invention of long-range weapons like the bow may represent one of the earliest technological enablers of something disturbingly close to organized warfare. Not the chaotic skirmishes we imagine from primitive societies, but calculated, distance-based violence designed to minimize risk to the attacker while maximizing harm to the target. Think about what that actually means. The same tool that let a starving human finally reach a fleeing deer also became one of the earliest technologies that made large-scale, low-risk human killing possible. Survival and slaughter, born from the exact same idea, separated only by what or who the arrow was pointed at. And here's the question that should genuinely unsettle you, the one this entire story has been building toward. Every major leap in human technology since the bow follows the exact same pattern. Increase the distance between the human and the consequence of their action. Gunpowder increased it. Artillery increased it further. Aircraft increased it more. Drones and long-range precision weapons have pushed that distance to the point where a person can end a life on the other side of the planet without ever leaving a chair. We call this progress. And in some ways, it is fewer soldiers dying face-to-face, more precision, less collateral damage in theory. But underneath the progress is the exact same psychological trade discovered around a starving hunter's fire 64,000 years ago. The further away you are from the consequence, the easier it becomes to pull the trigger. The bow didn't just solve a hunger problem. It solved it by teaching the human brain something it never forgot, that distance changes morality. Not the rules, not the ethics on paper, the actual, felt, gut-level sense of what feels acceptable to do to another living thing. So here's the final thought to sit with as you close this video, walk away, and go back to your very modern, very comfortable life. Somewhere right now, a piece of technology exists, a message sent instead of said face-to-face, a decision made behind a screen instead of in a room, an action taken from far enough away that you never have to see what it actually does to another person. And every single time you use it, you're relying on the exact same psychological loophole. A starving human discovered by accident 64,000 years ago, staring at a deer they couldn't reach, the terrifying, still unresolved discovery that the further away you stand from someone, the easier it becomes to hurt them and never even feel it happen.